Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Category Visionaries. Today we're speaking with Saman Farid, CEO and founder of Formic, a robotics platform that's raised over $60 million in funding. Saman, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me on here, Brett.
No problem. Super excited for our conversation. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Talk to us about what you're building today.
So we've built the world's first, on-demand robot workforce. So if you run a factory of any sort, you can call us and we'll show up with a robot to fill your empty headcount, and we'll start doing work for you on an hourly basis. So the promise of the robot revolution is here, and we're trying our best to make that a reality as soon as possible.
Take us back to the founding of the company, October 2020. First off, pretty interesting time to start a company. It's, 6 months into COVID. So take us back to those early days.
Yeah, we did start right in the middle of COVID. The backstory was I was a venture capitalist prior to this for about 15 years. I was investing in a lot of robotics and AI and machine learning companies. And so on the one hand, I had this kind of incredible optimism for the things that robotics and AI were enabling. And I think a little bit naively optimistically, which is how I think most people in the tech industry are, I thought that now that the technology works, it should be proliferated and it should be everywhere. And then kind of when COVID hit and we had all of these supply shortfalls and, we were going to grocery stores and there were empty shelves, it kind of prompted me to ask some questions around why and what was happening. And as I spent more time with these, manufacturers of the most basic products that we use on a day-to-day basis, I started to realize that there was just such a shortage of labor available. There's currently 1.5 million unfilled jobs in manufacturing looking for people. During COVID, that number was significantly higher. And there, 10,000 baby boomers per day are retiring out of the manufacturing industry and are not being backfilled. And so there's these factories that are fully functional, ready to produce stuff, but desperately short-staffed to produce the products that we need and want. And what I realized was that despite the fact that the robotics technology works, there's still this missing step in terms of getting it to a place where it's useful for the people who need it the most. And so that was really the founding hypothesis for Formic. Is there something that we can do to make it easier for people to adopt robotics and automation? Is there anything that we can do to help speed up, the robot revolution that we joke about? And so yeah, those were kind of the founding ideas. We pulled together a few people. We pulled together some early funding. We were really lucky to have some fantastic investors and team members join us on those early days, and we were off to the races.
What was it like when you transitioned from being a VC to being a founder here? And I see earlier in your career, you were a founder. So you were a founder, you were a VC, now you're a founder again. What was it like making that transition back to being a founder?
Yeah, I think when you're a builder, there's an itch that can never get scratched by being an investor. I think it constantly was thinking about, things that I wanted to build, things that I wish existed in the world but didn't. And as a VC, it's extremely satisfying because you get to meet all these incredible entrepreneurs, you get to learn from them, you get to see their journeys. But what I realized is that being a VC is a job I can do when I'm 60. Until then, I should really spend all the energy that I have building stuff. And so, it was something that I was craving to do for a while. And then at the same time, when I was an investor and I saw this challenge around robotics and automation, I realized that this was, a $10 billion or bigger opportunity. If I didn't jump on it now, I would regret it for the rest of my life. And so those two things together really pushed me to start Formic. And it was, like you said, a really weird time. Not only was it kind of smack in the middle of COVID when there was a lot of uncertainty in the world, I was actually also expecting my first child right around then. And I think I had my first child, 2 months after we started the company. So really, kind of by all bets, probably wasn't the best time to start a company, but I think when you have to do something, you do it, right? And I'm extremely glad that I did and took the leap to start the company.
Similar, but just on the other end of it, I started a company 3 months before we had our first baby. And it was a hard conversation to have with my wife and kind of make the case for that. But she was very supportive. And I think there is no perfect timing. I think that was the crux of my argument is there's never going to be a perfect timing. There's always going to be reasons that it's not now. But I feel like that's not an easy way to live life. And I think you'll end up regretting a lot if you do live that way.
Without a doubt. And I think there's a lot to say about the unsung heroes of startups, which are the spouses and families of founders who really make it possible to do what you do.
Totally agree. I'll be happy to share this with my wife as well so she can get a shout out. You can do the same. We'll be in a good spot.
Will do.
Now, let's talk about the state of robotics. So, how have you seen robotics evolve since you first started really investing here?
Yeah, so I think robotics is one of those things where the promise of robotics has always been at the forefront for everybody in the tech industry, right? We watch movies and sci-fi, and that's a source of a lot of inspiration. And every few years, there's this kind of question that everybody asks around, like, why aren't there more robots? You go to the typical farm or construction site or factory, and you don't see any robots. And today, we're seeing that again in the form of humanoid robots. People are getting really excited by the fact that maybe the humanoid form factor is really what's needed to crack the code. And so, robotics technology has gotten significantly better over the last few years, without a doubt. Computer vision and deep learning have allowed computers to understand the physical world. Autonomous driving and things like that have actually trained a whole generation of suppliers, whether it's people who build LiDAR or sensors or cameras or chips, to provide kind of all of these infrastructural components that really are necessary for building a robotics company. So on the one hand, that we are in the middle of massive change, which is really exciting. On the other hand, if you look at robotics adoption in the past, there actually is, a few industries that really did wholesale kind of start adopting robotics really quickly. One of those is the automotive industry, where up until today, since about 30 years ago, they've been aggressively adopting robotics and industrial robotics. And they also have built kind of really large internal engineering capabilities. Currently, I think in the US, about 80% of robots are sold to the automotive industry. So it's not that, no adoption is happening. It's that it's really very much focused on automotive industry and the very big companies. Everybody else has really struggled to adopt robots at scale. And so what we realized there is that, it's not actually a capabilities problem at its core. There's really an accessibility problem around the adoption of robotics technology. And so, we looked at other industries where the same thing was true. And we found that this is actually a very common theme in the adoption of new technology. There's usually, one or two industries that are really good at adopting, and then it takes a long time for proliferation to happen amongst others. One example of that is with, servers, right? Like there was a period of time where if you wanted to have access to email or build a website, the only way that you could do that would be to buy $50 to $100,000 of servers, bring in a fiber optic or a D1 line or whatever at the time, build a big air conditioned room in your office. And all of those things cost a lot of money, require a lot of expertise. And so there was a very small number of people who had access to be able to do all of that. And it wasn't until, hosted services or cloud services became much more prominent that we saw adoption at scale. Most people in the world who have email addresses or have websites don't run their own servers. And that ranges from, the small individuals all the way up to kind of large corporations. A lot of very large companies in the world. Netflix is one example. They're an incredible tech company. They've got fantastic engineers, but despite that, they've chosen to use AWS to provide all of their cloud services. And I think that's a common theme that we've seen in a lot of industries where, to really get good at adopting new technology, you need to build special capabilities, and that didn't really exist previously in the robotics world.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode. One thing that I just find fascinating still, and it hasn't gone away, every time I get into a Waymo, I am excited. Like, I feel like a little kid because I'm just so mind blown that, like, this technology is here. I feel like, for the first 30 years of my life, everyone was talking about this technology was coming. Now it's finally here. What I thought was interesting, I was watching Dara, the CEO of Uber, on another podcast, and he was talking about even if these robots and these cars are 10x safer than, human driver, that's not enough because the human expectation here is 100x when it comes to safety and things like that. Do you see something similar? Like, do you think about robots in a similar way that, like, the safety standards and how safe they are, it has to be 100x higher than a human?
I would say, I think in the manufacturing industry, the requirement is not quite as high. I mean, obviously the safety requirements are very, very high, but in terms of performance, because there's such a shortage of labor, even if a robot performs 50% of the quality of a human, I think there's still a lot of people that would adopt robots. It's hard for people to grasp if they don't spend time in manufacturing how dire the labor shortage is today. And so I think that out of that desperation, people are willing to accept a lot in order to adopt a lot more robotics. I mean, safety is a non-negotiable, of course, but safety really isn't the biggest problem when it comes to robot deployments in manufacturing. Performance really is a much harder thing to beat. And so, yeah, what we're seeing is that the robots that we're deploying are significantly faster and stronger and better than human performance. But even then, I think like the demand for adoption is just so high.
What's the state of the commercialization efforts here? Is this, fully deployed, customers are using it? Is this in R&D? Where are things today?
Yeah, so we are deployed currently in about 100 factories across the US. So we're making all kinds of products, everything from, matcha powder that ends up in Starbucks to nachos that end up in Chipotle and, all kinds of grocery products, all products that end up in automotive and aerospace and defense. We make metal parts for aircraft. We make plastic parts for drilling and mining equipment. So we are, truly already in the field, already in production, already in deployment in a large number of facilities. And we're seeing that usage data continue to rise every single day. We monitor all of our robots that are in the field on a minute by minute basis, and we get to see, what their cycle time is and what the errors are. And we're really proud to have this kind of fleet of deployments that are in the real world doing useful things, making products that, probably are in your house somewhere.
It's such an interesting answer because I feel like a lot of the other robotics companies that I read about, even some of the robotics companies that I have on the show, they're with their technology. It's very much an R&D. It's very much a conversation of, here's what is possible with our technology. What was your, I don't want to say your secret, but like, how did you make that a different answer? Like, how were you able to answer it in that way? Like, what did you focus on? What did you get right to have this deployed?
Yeah, I think we really made a big focus not to get overly enamored by the technology itself. There are a lot of advances happening in robotics technology, but what we realized is that the number one thing is performance and reliability for our customers. So, the typical factory runs, 2 shifts a day, and so they need really, really high uptime. If your robot goes down for any reason, you can make an excuse and say, oh, my technology is not mature enough, or the sensor broke, or whatever it might be. If your robot is down even 2% of the time, what that means is you're dropping hundreds of boxes a day or, hundreds of parts a day. And so we really focused from the beginning on reliability. We said, let's not necessarily go and find the newest technology out there for every kind of robot in the world. Let's go find the things that are the most reliable and choose the path that leads to the highest robustness for our customers. And that turned out to really be a differentiator because, that's the number one thing our customers care about when we deploy robots is, can it do the job and will it go down for any reason? And if it does, you don't even have a chance. So I think a lot of these robotics companies that you're talking about, they come out of academia or they come out of large tech companies or even, coming out of software companies. And, in software, there's this mentality that you can kind of iterate really quickly. In academia, there's this mentality that, the coolest technology wins. And I think in the real world, what we found is neither of those are true, right? With robotics, you don't really get the chance to iterate quickly. Once you deploy something, if it doesn't work, then you've just lost that customer. Even if it's down for 10 minutes, you've lost that customer. So you have to build for extreme robustness. And, for the people coming from academia, they may say, oh, well, there's all these kind of new advanced tools and new advanced ways of solving these problems. But actually, when you boil it down, most of them are not ready for performance specs that we need. We often actually get academics coming to pitch us and they say, oh, I've built this, new tool or new algorithm that allows me to do the thing that you're doing, way faster. And when we look at their performance numbers, they're very, very proud that they say, oh yeah, it worked with 98% accuracy, which, sounds really nice. But actually, when you look at a manufacturing facility, if you're doing, let's say, 10,000 operations per day, and you're only 98% accurate, that means you're dropping, hundreds of parts per day, making hundreds of mistakes per day, which is just completely unacceptable in a manufacturing environment. So you need to have 99.98, percent or higher performance, which is when you tell that to somebody in academia, they're typically shocked, right? They're like, that's unrealistic, that's impossible. There's all these different, issues and challenges. And so I think people are just not as knowledgeable about what the standards need to be in a production environment.
I want to ask a little bit about messaging. There's so many great messages on your website that I want to unpack. So I'll start with try before you buy. Like, how do you pull off try before you buy when we're talking about these, big robotic arms that are going into these manufacturing operations? Like, how do you do try before you buy there?
Yeah. So one of the things that we've had to do very early on is build a level of productization into these robots that makes them easy to deploy and easy to program and easy to redeploy so that we don't incur a lot of cost actually to be able to do a single deployment and be able to do it quickly. That's very different from the traditional kind of robotics mentality where it's these kind of very heavy, very, engineer heavy deployments where you had to spend hundreds of engineering hours to get a system up and running. We're very, very focused on making them fast and easy. And that's, very, very different. The other thing that we've had to be able to do is build a really sophisticated capital stack, right? So if you're spending venture capital dollars to go and buy hardware, this business model is completely not feasible. It's really important for us to be able to work with different kinds of pools of capital that have different needs and different amounts of flexibility. And so we've been able to put together $250 million plus of debt facilities that we use to finance these deployments. And that allows us a certain amount of flexibility around our working capital and deployment capability that allows us to be, more flexible than what people are used to. So there's that. And there's also 100 things in between, how we price things, how we build our maintenance network, how we vet projects before we actually deploy something to ensure that they don't get returned. There's 100 little operational details that need to get sorted out before you can actually effectively make that kind of an offer with confidence.
This show is brought to you by the Global Talent Co., a marketing leader's best friend in these times of budget cuts and efficient growth. We help marketing leaders find, hire, vet, and manage amazing marketing talent for 50 to 70% less than their US and European counterparts. To book a free consultation, visit globaltalent.co.
What about the pay for productivity? That was another message that I thought was fascinating. How does that work? And talk to us about that idea to innovate a totally different business model. Because that's what I think is very interesting here is it's not just an innovative product. It sounds like it's a completely innovative business model as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one of the things that is a very common failure mode in robotics is that, somebody convinces somebody else that this robot is a really great idea and then they buy it and then, 2 months later they regret it. Either it doesn't work or it doesn't perform as promised or, the needs change and they have to program it or reprogram it. And generally what that means is that these users of robotics are stuck paying for the same thing over and over and over again. You pay $100,000 up front, to get it to work, and then something changes and you have to go and pay another $50,000 for somebody to reprogram it for you. You pay another $50,000 for it to, to change some piece of the hardware. And it's this kind of never ending bottomless pit of money. And what we found is actually a lot of our customers, before we show up, they have a room somewhere in their factory that is essentially a robot graveyard. They bought a few things, they didn't work, everybody was disappointed, and they kind of swore off robotics. And this is one of the problems in American manufacturing is, because there's all these failures, people are not adopting new technology. And as a result, we're ending with much lower productivity in our factories. So what we realized is that the only way that we could really drive adoption quickly was if we focused heavily on changing that status quo, right? And that meant putting our money where our mouths are and guaranteeing performance and guaranteeing throughput in a way that nobody's done before. That's something that's easy to say and easy to talk about, but practically is very, very difficult to do because it means we need to build, a nationwide maintenance network. We need to build really high quality monitoring tools for all of the robots. We need to design the systems for robustness and we need to vet the projects effectively beforehand. And on top of all of that, we need to be able to use AI and intelligence to really quickly fix issues when they come up. We can't say, oh, some part broke and now we're stuck waiting for 5 business days until the new part arrives. We have to build in enough robustness and intelligence that we can detect those things long before that they become issues and resolve them. So all of those are, kind of second order implications of these promises that we're making to our customers. But the flip side is, luckily, what we're seeing is that really makes all the difference in the world when it comes to adopting robotics. We are providing the only solution out there that actually guarantees performance and guarantees throughput. And that means that we are able to, provide robots to a whole class of customers that previously never thought they would adopt robotics.
When it comes to the market category, then, how do you think about the market category? Is it pay for productivity or robotics? Like, is that the category or what is it?
I think the category is labor, right? Like we're filling empty headcount at these factories. How we do it is irrelevant as long as the product that we offer is close enough to labor that we can actually accomplish that need. And so, in my mind, kind of that pay for productivity is part of making the robots close enough to a labor product that we can go to customers and offer that.
What about fundraising? So, given that you were a VC before and I built this company, like what have you learned about fundraising? And then what advice would you have for founders who are trying to build hard tech?
I think that the more deep tech your product is, the less people there are that are going to understand it. And so as a result, I think what that means for fundraising is that it's really not about convincing somebody that your idea is good or right. It's really about finding those investors that understand your issue or are willing to understand your issue and what you're trying to solve for. And I think that there's a lot of wasted breath by founders who spend time having these repeated conversations with investors about why what they're building matters and why it's important. And in reality, that's often, wasted breath. If they believe it, you'll have them quickly and early. And if they don't, no amount of convincing is going to get them to this.
As you reflect on the journey so far, what do you think's been the most important go to market decision that you've made?
That's a good question. I think one of the most important go to market decisions we've realized is that hiring technical salespeople is a bad idea. And I think that was something that sounds a little bit like a truism, but in robotics and automation, that's quite controversial. I think a lot of people really believe that in order to sell something as technical as a robot, you really need somebody who can understand manufacturing, understand robotics, understand all of the technical aspects of it. And that's something we believed for a long time as well. It wasn't until a lot later that we realized that that was mistaken. I think we can supplement our salespeople with technical solutions engineers. What we can't afford is somebody who doesn't understand our customer and our customer's pain points and our customer's needs. And so we really pivoted towards hiring much, much less technical salespeople, but instead focus on salespeople that really understand our customers and where they're coming from. And it's made a world of difference.
If you think ahead the next, let's say, 12 months, what's your top priority or top priorities?
We're really, building up our customer success function right now. We're seeing a lot of upsell opportunities within our existing customers. As we deploy a few robots, we see that, once they see the potential and the possibility of this, we're seeing them kind of come back for a lot more. So we're building up a really strong customer success function. The other thing that's a high priority for us right now is, building general market awareness. I think we are now very convinced that once people know about us and what we do and how we do it, we have a very high conversion rate across the board. And so now we're focused on improving that awareness across our different customer segments.
Final question for you. Let's zoom out 3 to 5 years into the future. What's the big picture vision look like here?
The big picture vision for Formic is that we are an instant, on-demand, available workforce for every factory in the world. So we want them to be able to call us. I don't know if you ever watched that movie iRobot with Will Smith. So there's that company. In the movie, it's a big evil corporation. We're going to be the less not evil version of it, right? But providing a workforce for kind of every job, every task, as soon as you need it on demand is really a core part of what we're trying to do here. And so what that requires is, us to adopt a lot of different kinds of technology to increase our deployment footprint, our maintenance footprint, our general kind of operational muscle. But, I think this is something the world really, really needs. If we want to live in a world of abundance, we need manufacturing facilities that are operating at full bore, and we need manufacturers that are competitive globally. We need to increase the kind of, quality and diversity of the goods that are available. And, manufacturing is upstream of every other industry, whether it's agriculture, whether it's construction, whether it's the military, whether it's healthcare. None of those industries exist if you can't build the parts and components that they all need. And that being the case, I think there's just so much importance in building a strong manufacturing base. And it's something that inspires us and our team every single day.
Amazing. I love the vision. I really love this conversation. Before we wrap up here, if there's any founders that are listening in, they want to follow along with you and your journey, where should we send them?
Yeah, you can just find us on Twitter or /X at GoFormic. You can go to our website, formic.co, and you can find me also on X at Saman Farid.
Amazing. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.